Hey everybody, Jane here, and today I want to talk to you about the book The Marriage Act by John Marrs.
Pictures and patterns put into words that stream across the page, capturing life as soft spoken.
Alright guys, before we get started, I want to read you what Goodreads says this book is, and like the synopsis they give. Britain, the near future. A right-wing government believes it has the answer to society's ills, the Sanctity of Marriage Act, which actively encourages marriage as the norm, punishing those who choose to remain single. But four couples are about to discover just how impossible relationships can be when the government is monitoring every aspect of our personal lives, monitoring every word, every minor disagreement, and will use every tool in its arsenal to ensure everybody will love, honor, and obey. Okay. So, that is sort of what this book is about. And I say sort of because my biggest complaint about this book is I didn't think it did a great job at looking at how the Marriage Act affected most couples. This isn't an exploration of the Marriage Act and kind of how normal people in that situation would respond and how it could affect most people. Instead, this is a book told from 5 different perspectives of all the craziness of this world. First, we have a woman who dreams of being social media famous and finds herself promoting the Marriage Act because and even like more strict and invasive acts. She's all about the big brother is watching. She's like, bring big brother in your home because they are going to prevent, terrible things from happening. And she pushes that because she had a friend who was the victim of DV. And the problem is we see from the beginning that she is just in this to promote her career. She is not actually at all interested in the Marriage Act. And she doesn't really believe necessarily that it's the right thing. She just wants to be famous. So we have her. We have a woman who is part of a group fighting against the Marriage Act. And whose husband is pretty awful. And so that one is more about their relationship, but it's about their relationship like not as a normal healthy couple, but like he's awful and she's fighting the Marriage Act and they're not an upgraded marriage, but he wants them to be. You have a man who's initially we think he is a man who has a wife with dementia, but we learn that he is a man who has been living with his wife's deceased body for the past 6 months. And the government finally catches on because of their upgraded marriage and comes in and for reasons is like, okay, you have to hurry up and get remarried so that because we were so into marriage. We don't care that you haven't mourned your wife. It has been 6 months and you need to hurry up and get married so that you can be married because that's super important in this world. And he decides that that is not what he wants to do. We have a situation where a couple has been overheard on their monitoring systems kind of quipping and joking and fighting a little bit, and the government sends in an agent to help them, but this dude is a psychopath who murders people, and so like bad things happen. And the last point of view is a guy who we think has killed the like celebrity who was the face of the Marriage Act, but it's a lot more complicated than that. So I was going into this book expecting a book about relationships dealing with being monitored and, how what you say can be misinterpreted. And while that is a very small part of this book is mostly about the dystopian world that has been created by this monitoring of marriages. And while I liked that, I was less interested in it than I would have been if it had been about couples dealing with the actual Marriage Act. Like people who have complex and beautiful histories trying to learn to talk to each other and decide if they want to upgrade to the Marriage Act and voluntarily and why they might and how does that affect them, couples who maybe got along before and then move forward or who think they're doing great and then go into the upgraded marriages and get the Alexas and suddenly things aren't so good. Maybe there's some dirty little secrets or, people like the one couple who quit with each other and they're sent like a relationship responder to try to fix them. And they're like, but we don't need fixed, but the responder's not a psychopath. It was good, but it wasn't what I thought I was getting. So I think if you like the dystopian, Big Brother is watching, stories that's kind of like people fighting against the government to try to get the unjust law overturned, I think you could really enjoy this. And I did enjoy it. I gave it a 3-star. It wasn't what I was expecting, and I didn't care about all of the storylines equally. I was fairly invested in the couple with the marriage counselor, but only because we know from the beginning that he's bad news. So I was fairly invested in him, and I was fairly invested in the guy whose wife had dementia. The other people's storylines I didn't necessarily care a ton about. I didn't ever connect very well with the characters, and other than like the couple that was having the psychopath marriage counselor, like they were the only people that I really and the old man with the wife, they were the only characters I really connected with as characters. The social media girl was horrible. The most sympathetic character, which is I would say the one who was like in the organization that was fighting the Freedom Act or the Marriage Act, they were the freedom fighters. I don't remember what they were called, but I thought she was probably the most sympathetic character. I wasn't particularly interested in her because we don't get much about her as a person. We get a lot of her in her situation. I appreciated what she was doing. It was very plot centric, and I'm a character person, and so like having the plot centric stuff made me less interested because I didn't care. I did care, but I didn't care about her. And so I think that was my big issue with this whole book, is just while it was a really cool premise and a really cool story, I didn't feel like we got enough of the characters for me to care about anybody enough to really propel the story forward and to give me a good time. So I think this book will be a big hit if you are not one of those people who really, really needs to connect with characters. If you are happy to just read this really cool plot in this dystopian world and see people like fight for their rights and, see the argument and discussion, I think there is a good discussion about rights of privacy and, the benefits and negatives of having government interference in things. And I do think, too, that this was not as both ways of a discussion as I would have liked. Everybody who we follow shows us that the Marriage Act is a bad thing. I would have liked to seen a couple couples maybe who really benefited from it and who weren't just doing lip service. Like the one girl, the social media girl, she was just like for it because she wanted to be famous. She didn't really believe in the marriage act. Like she does have that story of her friend, but that's not like, she's not really a crusader for it. She's I want to get famous. And so I didn't find that sympathetic, and I didn't find that as like, oh, somebody who really believes in the act. The guy who we believe has, taken out the face of the public face of the marriage act, the actress that was involved in the marriage act, I cared about him more than I cared about what happened to him and thought he had an interesting story, though I didn't care about him as a character. He was not an interesting character. What was happening to him was incredibly interesting. And he's the only one who I think started out kind of pro-act, but even he didn't like convince us that the act was a good thing. And then he learns that there is more and it's worse than he thought when other things come along. Because, when you start allowing the government to have like its claws in things, that can be a really intense domino effect. And so I was interested by the end. Like by the end of his story, I was invested in what was happening to him. I wasn't invested in him as a character, and at the beginning I didn't care. But at the end, like the last 2 chapters of his story, I thought was really cool. But this book, I just didn't think, it didn't do what I wanted it to do, which was show me 4 couples under this act and how it's affecting their marriage as the primary point. Instead, it was all these people who are kind of either using the act to get ahead or fighting the act, or it wasn't really what I thought I was getting when I went into it. And then in addition to that, I think it didn't have, I felt like it was very one-sided. It was a one-sided discussion about the act and not any kind of, okay, so here's the people that benefited, this is a reasonable, like there's reasonable arguments that could be made that this should have been passed. This did get passed. Like people weren't just crazy. The government just wasn't corrupt. There were reasons and times and, more than just the passing comment by our social media lady about, yeah, this could have saved my friend who was a victim of DV, because the marriage act would have found that stuff was going on behind closed doors sooner. And that would have been a cool discussion. Why didn't we have that? Why didn't we have that, person who's advocating for it because of the situation that a friend had and for noble reasons? Why didn't we have, people who maybe thought it was a good idea initially and then we see where it's not? And then the other issue I have is it really is upgrading to the smart marriage becomes about greed. It becomes about, you're upgrading to this marriage so that you can have a better house, a better car, and all this stuff. And I didn't necessarily think that looked at like the people who really did get into the marriage act because, they want their marriage monitored. They want warning signs. They want somebody to come in and give them tips and say, hey, the way you just yelled at your wife wasn't appropriate. But there's none of that in this book. And that's kind of what I wanted from it. So I think this book is really a cool look at this society that is fighting the marriage act. And it does bring some interesting points and interesting discussion about social media in our lives, the constant computers around us and things that could be listening in on us and things like that. It just wasn't what I wanted from it though. I didn't think it was bad, but I didn't I think if you know going in what it is, you will enjoy it, and that is what you're looking for. You will enjoy it much more than I did. Again, not a bad book, just not what I was looking for. All right, guys, have you read The Marriage Act? If so, what did you think? Did you go in with different expectations than I did? Did you not read did you read a synopsis other than the Goodreads one? Because I'd read the Goodreads synopsis when I ordered it from the library. My book has a slightly different synopsis, but I hadn't read that. I'd read the Goodreads one, so that's what I was expecting. So did you go into it with different expectations if you really enjoyed it? Is there other books that are a similar theme, but that actually look at the characters affected by the laws and give a more, both sides of the story view? Anything like that. Because it was a cool idea. I liked the idea. I felt a little let down by the way it played out. All right, guys, this has been Jane. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.